As some of you may remember, back in 2005, Tony Blair attended the European Parliament in Brussels and had a bit of an argument with Nigel Farage and some of the British MEPs.
Let me just tell you, sir, and your colleagues, you sit with our country's flag, you do not represent our country's interests. This is the year 2005, not 1945. These are our partners, they're our colleagues, and our future lies in Europe.
Now, the interesting thing and the main problem with what Blair said in that segment is just like a typical Remainer misleading the public about what the European Union is and how it actually functions. So these people always say that the European Union is basically a family of European nations who have their freedom and democracy and sovereignty, and they come together and work together voluntarily for the greater good. In reality, it's the exact opposite. Now, as you can see, the background to this video looks slightly different to my usual videos, is because I'm spending the next few days and the whole of this week basically in Brussels at the European Union to try and find out more about how this bureaucratic machine actually works. Now, over the last couple of days, I spoke to a lot of MEPs and people who work in the building and who are experts in the area of the European politics, and we found out some interesting information. Some of them were kind of obvious because they're public knowledge already, and some of them not too much. But we're going to cover them in this video to teach Tony Blair and other typical Remainers about how the European Union actually works. Okay, let's start with the European Parliament and MEPs. MEPs get a basic salary, it's about £5,000 to £6,000 a month, and so that should cover a lot of things because that's a lot of money for anybody. But on top of that, they also get £4,000 allowance, which again, usually the way it works in the UK Parliament and in all normal parliaments out there is that you, generally speaking, have expenses. You go spend something which is on your related to your work, and you get the receipt, you bring it back, you justify it, you fill out a form, and then you get your money back. In the European Parliament, the way the allowance works is they just pay you the £4,000 cash on top of your basic salary, which was about £5,000 to £6,000 a month, and you're just going to have to deal with it. That's all yours. So that's a lot of money, but there is more. So the European Parliament and the EU pay MEPs per day every time they attend a parliamentary session. So obviously MEPs don't have to turn up every day to every session, but if they do come to work, they also get £300 on top of what they're already getting. Imagine getting a salary, then getting some sort of bonus for doing nothing, and then you also get an encouragement fee for just turning up to work. So that should cover everything that they have and all the costs. But no, there's a bit more. So there's a car service for MEPs, and they could call that service and get a limousine to take them anywhere they want. Seriously, why do they need the limo? That also includes general travel, which the travel office in the European Parliament basically books it for them, all paid for, and it doesn't get taken out of their allowance or salary bit or that £300 that they get every day. But on top of all this, there's also an interesting incentive which the European Parliament pays for. So MEPs and members of staff in the European Parliament get free French lessons for some reason. You just learn French for free. So you can take it, you don't have to take it if you don't want to, but it's all paid for by the taxpayers already. Now, there are also a number of committees where MEPs could join, and a lot of them are basically fake groups, and what they do is they organize fact-finding missions where they essentially get free travel and holidays to various different continents and countries, and they get free food and free drinks, and that's how they do work here. Now, going back to Tony Blair, on that same day, he also said something interesting. This is again back in 2005.
When you're the leader of a national country and you come to a European negotiation, it is inevitable, honestly, that people are going to argue for their national interests. The great challenge of Europe, and actually its great achievement, is that despite people naturally and rightly arguing for their national interests, they nonetheless can come to a collective agreement.
So he admits that obviously when you get 28 countries into a group, everyone's going to be fighting for their sovereignty and their own national interest. And he said that actually it's been an achievement of the EU to essentially ignore that, but he used different wording. He basically said that countries that want to focus on their self-interest voluntarily give up that right and all work together. In reality, we're going to explain to you how the European Union tackled this issue. So as some of you may already know, the European Parliament is not a real parliament. The members of this parliament, the MEPs, don't have the right to introduce legislation to the floor of the House, the chamber. So what do they actually do? So the European Commission, which is the executive, which is not elected, it's an appointed one behind closed doors, essentially introduce a legislation, and before it actually brings it forward to the chamber of the European Parliament, it goes to a committee. This is the exact opposite of way of a normal process in a normal parliament, including Westminster. Now, during that process, members of the committee essentially discuss a number of issues related to the legislation, and they could propose amendments. They could add amendments to it, which you think it might be a good idea. That means there is some sort of accountability. Because when you add amendments to legislations in the UK Parliament, they could easily block the actual legislation in Parliament. But again, it doesn't work that way here. So after the amendments are added, it's up to the European Commission to decide if they want to accept or ignore those amendments. Now, once they've done that, which basically makes that whole first process completely pointless, as it's always up to the Commission to decide what they want, then they send it to the European Parliament, where they vote on it. Now, during this process, this stage, again, the MEPs don't really have any power. All they can do is essentially agree or disagree to this future bill. Now, considering no country or a specific party from a country has a majority in the European Parliament, because it doesn't work that way, it's impossible for them to basically get together and vote against something that could damage that specific country's interest. So instead, they have created these groups of essentially generic centre-right parties or centre-left or far-left or liberal parties that could get together from different countries and create a group which is basically like a political party, but it never works. Because again, centre-right parties in the UK are very different to centre-right parties in Germany or in Poland, for example. Now, if we focus on the voting, so you might think they have some sort of professional mechanism for their voting system in the chamber of the European Parliament, but in reality they just basically ask people to put their hands up, and then they just count to see if they can guess which one has the majority. Obviously, if it's 50-50, then they ask members to electronically vote, and they count it properly later on. Now, the problem with these groups that we mentioned is that essentially what the Europhiles and the pro-EU groups have done, considering they always have the majority in the European Parliament and the European Union, is that they always have these stitch-ups where they essentially get together to block all the member states and all the MEPs that want to reform the EU. So those that always keep saying remain and reform, it's never happened. We've all tried it, not just the UK, other countries do, but we've always failed. They also, once a month, they move everyone from the European Parliament building in Brussels to Strasbourg, which has an identical parliamentary building, which they will do the exact same thing, but in a different country. Now, when we say move, we don't just mean MEPs. We mean all staff members, everyone who works in the building. They will move from Brussels to Strasbourg, and it's all paid for by your tax money. This is the European Union that Remainers like Tony Blair are passionately defending. Up to a point where a few days ago, Tony Blair said this. In an article a few days ago in The Times, Blair wrote on why Boris Johnson should hold another Brexit referendum. He said that a general election will be tempting for the next PM, but the public vote on no deal is his only way out of this Brexit deadlock. Now, ever since the 2016 referendum happened, the Remainers kept saying that the majority of people, especially Brexiteers, didn't know what they voted for because they didn't have the full information. Now, luckily, over the last few years, a lot of information and details have been coming out of the European Union and how they work, how they behave, including this video explaining how the European Parliament functions or doesn't. And this is exactly why every survey now shows that more people are pro-Brexit. So, well done, Remainers. You've created a situation where if you have another vote, you will lose with a bigger margin. As always, thanks for watching. If you want to follow me on Twitter, the Twitter handle should be somewhere down here. And if you want to support this channel, You can join the Cabinet Club, the link is in the description, and as usual, don't forget to subscribe and click on the notification bell next to it. And I'll see you tomorrow with a new video from Brussels.